Today I'm going to be presenting on the adolescence assignment. The main point of this assignment is about how the beginning of adolescence is denoted by obvious physical and cognitive changes brought about by puberty. Today I'm going to be talking about the different details of this beginning of puberty and of sexual maturation. This presentation will be on physical and cognitive development. The beginning of adolescence is marked by a lot of changes in the body and maturing in both males and females. Today we're going to be outlining the physical and cognitive changes that bring about puberty and the changes in the sexual configuration of both males and females. To start, adolescence is the period between childhood and adulthood. This period is a big transition and usually lasts around 2 years, and it kickstarts the sexual maturity in individuals, and it carries all the way to independent adulthood and full sexual development. Puberty is initiated by the thalamus and the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. The first stage is called adrenarche, which is the first stage that characterizes this puberty change. This characterizes the release of certain hormones that lead to a change in the appearance of secondary sex characteristics in the pubertal growth spurt. Primary and secondary sex characteristics are the things that define both male and females and that differentiate the two. This includes the testes in males and the uterus in females, and the other areas that are directly involved in the developmental phases of reproduction. Secondary sex characteristics are things that involve pubertal process and the development of things indirectly related to reproduction, which involve voice changes, facial hair and other body hair growing, and the size of primary sex characteristics. The main difference between primary and secondary sex characteristics is in the purpose in which the characteristics are instilled in the person. Primary sex characteristics involve direct correlation to the reproduction phase, whereas secondary sex characteristics just influence the fact that this reproduction phase has begun. They are just tell-all signs that the body is ready to reproduce, and they're an outward representation that the body is in the process of hitting puberty. Some specific female and male characteristics are genital size. In males, testicles grow and sperm production begins. In females, ovulation and menstruation begins. Both of these things tell that puberty has begun or is in full throttle, and the body is headed towards full development from childhood to adult. The next area of development is cognitive changes, which is brought about by hormonal influence. These changes aren't in puberty are brought through hormones, but cognition develops because of this. The brain is moving into a more complex and abstract thought process, which helps individuals be able to analyze information like they were not able to before and make emotional decisions like they weren't able to. This marks in developing concrete ideas and logical thinking. The theory highlighted here is Paget's formal operational stage, which is the age from 11 years old to adulthood. This stage marks developing concrete ideas and logical thinking. And it also involves being able to problem solve and assess other people's perspective and reasoning like they were unable to do before. They also start interacting with their peers in different ways like they hadn't before. This also comes being able to consider the opinions of other people, their thoughts and judgments, and use this to develop your own beliefs and self-concept. The impact of physical and cognitive development leads to sexual maturation, and that physical changes in an individual, such as testicle and breast enlargement, hair growth in pubertal regions, and an increase in estrogen and testosterone, which in boys leads to the reproduction function and in women leads to menstruation, are changing signs in people that are very crucial for knowing that sexual maturation has been accomplished. An adolescent's primary role, whether they realize it or not, is being able to establish their identity through behavior and ideologies. Establishing an identity has everything to do with self-confidence, self-concept, and how you see yourself in regards to relationships and with peers, romantic relationships, and parental relationships. Erickson outlines this identity versus role confusion by saying that the main purpose is to answer the questions, who am I and who do I want to be? Two major concepts of identity are self-esteem and self-concept. Self-esteem is defined as one's own feelings about themselves, whereas self-concept is establishing an identity as believing your own opinions and beliefs, and you define these opinions and beliefs confidently, consistently, and with stability. This is when an adolescent shifts from defining themselves based off simple thoughts or simple concrete descriptions and physical appearance to being able to evaluate their own personal values, thoughts, and opinions. Psychologists have found that the road to identity in an individual's development to come to their concept of who they are is more than being able to form this, because they develop this by practicing different behavioral patterns and seeing how their peers react to this to develop their own identity rather than forming into something that was already going to happen as their identity. The major categories in this are religious identity, political identity, vocational identity, ethnic identity, and gender identity. These areas are so crucial to making up the personhood of self-concept and self-identity. And they will honestly determine how a person answers who they are and how they fit into the world and the workspace and in who they believe they are at the core of their being. Marcia outlines 4 identity statuses and how she views an individual establishes their identity. And these things are identity achievement, which is where a person is able to become faithful to their own perceptions of the world and their actions align with what they believe about the world. The next is foreclosure, which is when an individual has completely observed who they are and they act in this way without exploring other options. The opposite of that is moratorium, which is the opposite of foreclosure, and this is when an individual is actively exploring other options of their identity. And the final one is diffusion, which is the last status of identity, and it defines an individual as not committing to an identity or exploring options. To finish out the thought of exploring and defining your identity, identity is the achievement of a goal, and when one has found their identity options to be solid, they have discovered their person and they have made a commitment to this identity. This overall describes the phases of adolescence and how someone comes to fully believe their identity and have a solid self-concept and self-identity.